All right, hello everybody. Today we're talking about FDR and the New Deal. Today's objective question is, why did FDR defeat Hoover, and how did he gain support for his New Deal? So kind of two questions in one, but two ones we can get to quickly. All right, so the election of 1932. At this point in office, we have Herbert Hoover. Remember that Herbert Hoover is a Republican, and because he's a Republican during this time period, we know that he's extremely laissez-faire. He wants the economy and the government to be completely separate. He believes that there should be, no amount of government in the economy and vice versa. Remember, he was a strong proponent of individualism, the idea that if you went out there and just worked hard enough, everything would work its way out. And that's kind of the philosophy he applied to the Great Depression. He just thought that, it would work itself out. Eventually people would start to, get back to work and stuff, and everything would improve. But that hasn't happened yet. And at this point, he's been president for 4 years, and even towards the end, to his credit, he did start some public works efforts, but for the most part, people are kind of done with Herbert Hoover. They've washed their hands of him. So they're very interested in the other nominee, a man named Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He's going to be selected by the Democratic Party. He is going to promise the Americans a New Deal, and the New Deal promises to increase the government's role in, the economy, society, America as a whole. It's literally the exact opposite of laissez-faire. So what we see with the election of 1932 is literally just two ideologies going, against one another. It's laissez-faire, which we've had for a while, which hasn't really been working lately, and the complete opposite. The opposite of laissez-faire, not complete, but very, very heightened government control. FDR's slogan for this period is going to be, "Happy days are here again." This is a song that was released around the same time period, and at a Democratic convention, they play it, and everyone goes wild, and they quickly associate "Happy Days Are Here Again" with FDR, and it becomes like the unofficial theme song of the Democrats and FDR for, the rest of his time in office. Now, a little bit more about FDR. FDR, as I mentioned, was a Democrat. He was from New York. He's from the very, very wealthy and political Roosevelt family. Now, FDR is not the first Roosevelt we've learned about. We learned about Teddy Roosevelt a few units ago. And yes, they are related. They are distant cousins from one another. Now, even though FDR was very wealthy, he was born into this basically like political royalty, through his, political career, we've seen that he actually was very good at kind of having the mindset of, what does an average American go through? How can I help the average American? So oftentimes when we see these wealthy individuals, they're kind of, spoiled and privileged. FDR was not that. He was very good at kind of putting himself in different shoes, which is why so many people felt like they could identify with him. Now, FDR is going to marry a woman named Eleanor Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt is the niece of Teddy Roosevelt. So Teddy Roosevelt's brother has a daughter named Eleanor Roosevelt, and she ends up marrying Franklin Roosevelt. Yeah, so Eleanor Roosevelt's name was Eleanor Roosevelt before she married Roosevelt because she was from the Roosevelt family as well. In fact, Eleanor Roosevelt and FDR were actually fifth cousin once removed from one another. So yes, technically related, but far enough away where it'll probably be fine. They end up having 6 very, very healthy, normal kids, and a interesting marriage with one another. Now, nowadays, he's currently on the dime that we have in the United States. Of course, not at this time period in history. I'm talking about now in modern day. He's the president we see on the dime. We can see that in the lower left-hand portion of the screen. And he also suffered from what we used to believe as polio. And up until recently, we were pretty sure it was polio. There's now been some research that said it may have been something else. But for now, we're still going with polio. And this paralyzed him. This, really, really did a number on his health. And this picture you see here with this young girl is one of the only pictures we have of FDR in the wheelchair. He was very, very aware of how being sick could affect the American viewpoint of him, and he didn't want to be limited by that. And because of that, in almost every single picture we see, FDR is, if he is standing, he's standing perfectly straight, and he's almost always leaning on a cane, a railing, or another person. It's a common trend we see with FDR. And the reason his legs are always so straight is because he was wearing leg braces that would kind of help stand him up. And he would prop himself up on a person or on a cane or on a podium if he's giving a speech. And later in life, in his third and fourth presidencies, more on that later, we see him almost always times when he's photographed, he's sitting down. And that's because later in life, he literally just couldn't stand it and pull it off anymore. Here we see a picture of one of his wheelchairs and the leg braces that he would wear underneath his clothes. And this was all to kind of prevent the mindset that he was, sick and frail and couldn't do the job. He was, able to do it, and he wanted to prove that. So what we have is on the left, Herbert Hoover, who's laissez-faire, who some people think got us into this mess, who a lot of people think hasn't gotten us out of this mess. And then on the other side, we have a Democrat who's promising us the complete opposite. So if you've been sitting there struggling for 3 years, you're one of that 25% that's unemployed. A new change sounds good to you, and that's what a majority of people are going to go with. Every state on here in this weird kind of pinkish red is going to go with FDR. And everyone, for the most part, except for, the really, really New England, bankers and stuff like that, are going to go in for the change. And FDR sweeps the election easily. He gets 89% of the electoral vote. So an easy win over Hoover because he's promising change. Now that FDR has been elected, right, he starts planning his first 100 days. The first 100 days of every presidency is important because it kind of sets the tone for the rest of your term. So within his first 100 days, he has a big spiel of New Deal policies, New Deal legislation. These are complete changes to what we've seen. This is complete government involvement. This is a heightening of the government being involved in the American society. And for some people, that's scary. And for other people, it's a huge relief. When FDR is inaugurated, he gives a very famous inaugural address, and his probably most famous quote from that is, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." You guys are going to look at his inaugural address in more detail, but that's just a great quote, a great takeaway that kind of summarizes what he's trying to tell the American people. Now, FDR also does a great job of kind of laying out his plan and explaining it to the American people so it doesn't look too crazy, it doesn't look too radical, and it doesn't look too complicated. And he does this through a series of what becomes known as fireside chats. So at this point, people get their news from the radio, right? There's no TV to sit around. It's a radio. They huddle around it. Sometimes it's around a fireplace, right? So you set the fire so you can be warm, right? You turn on the radio and you just listen, all right? Well, instead of having reporters report on the radio what the New Deal is going to be about, FDR himself uses the radio to broadcast his New Deal policies to the American people. And I'm not going to tell you that he dumbs it down, but he purposely simplifies these really complex strategies and kind of, makes them as clear and concise as possible. And he explains them to the American people in a very calm way that makes you feel like he has complete control over everything he's talking about. Like he has put so much thought, because he has, into this, right? And this is really going to help gain a lot of support for the New Deal. This is going to have a lot of people say, yeah, okay, I trust him. This dude knows what he's doing. FDR is going to be the first president to really heavily utilize radio, and it works well for him. Otherwise we'd have a reporter reporting on the radio what the president is saying. Instead, it's the president talking directly to you. And it's not a two-way conversation, but some people feel like it basically is. This is the first president to talk directly to them, and they're going to have, a personal connection with that. The fireside chats are going to be a great way to gain support for the New Deal. This on your slides is a great video about fireside chats. It has an excerpt from his first fireside chat. Definitely watch that. It's only like a minute long. And then the last thing I wanted to talk to you guys about is his wife, Eleanor Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt is such an important political figure, and we just don't at this point have any real place to put her in these notes that kind of make sense. So instead, I'm just kind of throwing her in at the end, and I know she'd forgive me. Let's talk about Eleanor Roosevelt, the cousin of the removed cousin, but the cousin of FDR. She's the first lady for FDR's 4 terms in office, right? He's going to be elected 4 times. It makes her the longest serving first lady of our United States history. She's going to completely redefine the role of what it means to be a first lady. She's going to call press conferences. She's going to, on occasion, publicly disagree with her husband's policies. She is a baller. She does not care. She's very, very outspoken for civil rights. She's a huge advocate for the African American society. She's a huge advocate for women. She's going to be referred to as the First Lady of the World by Harry Truman because of all the good work she does after World War II. She serves on the UN. She helps draft up the Declaration of Human Rights, which is an important document we still use today. In 1919, she's ranked in the top 10 of the most widely admired people of the 20th century. And my favorite part about Eleanor Roosevelt is that she was friends with Amelia Earhart. They actually met at a White House party, and they hit it off so well that Eleanor Roosevelt said, "Dude, I want to fly with you. Like, it sounds so cool." And Amelia Earhart goes, "Find me a plane and we can go." And they literally, in the middle of a White House party, leave, dressed in gowns and jewelry and all that stuff, right? They commandeer a plane and they fly it from Washington to Baltimore just for funsies, right? Eleanor Roosevelt says, "You've inspired me. I want to learn how to fly." And Amelia Earhart goes, "I'll teach you." And then we know what happened to Amelia Earhart. Or should I say we don't know what happened to Amelia Earhart. Amelia Earhart disappears before she's ever able to give Eleanor Roosevelt any flying lessons. And despite Eleanor Roosevelt's best efforts, she actually encourages a search for Amelia Earhart that cost the government about $4 million. And we never find her. And Eleanor Roosevelt never gets her flying lessons. Darn. But she does a bunch of other cool stuff too that she's probably a little bit more proud of. So yeah, that's FDR. That's the very, very beginning of the New Deal. And that's his awesome wife, Eleanor Roosevelt. On your slides, on this last slide, there's a great video on Eleanor Roosevelt. Take a minute or two to watch that. It's only 2 or 3 minutes long. It's a great summary of everything she's done that I just don't have time to talk about. So, all right, that's it. That's FDR and the beginning of the New Deal. Make sure to answer your objective question, and I'll see you later.